So welcome to our June 2021 virtual quality talk. Tina is not here, she's on vacation. So I'm going to be doing our announcements this month instead. First of all, thanks to D2L for once again letting us use their corporate Zoom account. If you haven't already, feel free to follow us on Twitter at KWSQA. Your 2021 KWSQA board, who's here today helping facilitate things, Tina, Kyle Lewis, Ed DeGraff, Rob Bowyer, Jared Small, Graham Harvey, and Bailey Hanna. So our upcoming quality talk, so next month is going to be on July 28th. We're back to the last Wednesday of the month. So next month, we're going to hear about 5 quality assurance trends to keep even when we go back to the new normal by Joel Modvaleski. As you can see, we've only got the next month planned out right now. So if you've got an idea for a quality talk, please submit them. The CFP is always open at kwsqa.org. We'd love to hear about your proposal and ideas that you might want to share. On that note, our virtual testing games is postponed. We were going to be having one with Shiny Docs. That's just going to be waiting a little bit longer. So if you have an idea, if your company would like to, be part of a testing games, feel free to reach out to us at info@kwsqa.org and let us know, what your company is and why you'd be interested in doing a testing games. We also now have our 2021 sustaining memberships. They're $20. They're available on our website. There's just a quick little link there for everybody. The sustaining membership is really about supporting the organization. And if you live or work in the Waterloo region, you're eligible for board nominations this year. So you could join us and help run all these events. Memberships, yeah, so just there on our screen, just over on the right-hand side. As always, we have our KWSQA code of conduct that hasn't changed for virtual meetings. That is still in place. If you have any questions or you want to report an incident, again, info@kwsqa.org, or you can reach out to one of us directly, and the full version is available on the website always. So today's agenda is a little different than a normal quality talk. We're actually going to be doing a panel discussion. Our members are going to actually be able to ask a bit more of a Q&A than they might normally have. And like we mentioned last month, we're now doing some post-meeting feedback. And this time there's a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card. That'll be drawn from everybody who fills out feedback between now and our annual general meeting in November, December. As long as you fill it out, you can fill it out every month, and every month will get you a new entry into that draw. So with all of that being said, today's presentation is how do things work while you work, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, I will take it over from here. My name is Rob Bowyer. I'll be moderating the session. I've been with the KWSQA for quite some time. We've done a few panels over the years, and they are generally successful. But you don't want to overuse something. But we thought we would try it out again this year. Obviously, we've never done it in the online format, so this will be sort of new to all of us, both organizers and attendees. So the basic process is we have our 4 panelists. We have Shane, Jenna, Geoff, and James. I'm going to let them introduce themselves rather than me making introductions. But generally what we are going to do is I have a number of questions prepared. I will ask the questions to all of the panelists and have them each answer, and then we will give participants an opportunity to follow up questions. I have a number of questions. We may not get to all of them. I have kind of pre-screened them with the panelists so they don't get any big surprises, and had an opportunity to think about the questions a little bit. So on my screen, I have James, Shane, Jenna, and Geoff. I think we'll go with that. If we could each start with, starting with you, James, if we can start with an introduction and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here.
Yeah, for sure. Mine's a little bit different from the time Bailey asked me and time this meeting started, I've switched jobs, I've switched companies, I've switched roles. So I'm going to answer the questions in a bit of a different format than I think of other teams. When you're asking me how things work where I work, I've been here 2 weeks and I don't even necessarily know where it works. So currently heading up the product team in Canada for Masterclass. On to week 2, but I have a pretty extensive background in medical-based software, mobile video gaming, and learning management systems. So that's my background, and I'll pass it to Shane, I guess, next.
Yeah, I'm currently working in the Kitchener-Waterloo area out of one of the, I guess, Canadian offices for Cash App, or Square might be a little more familiar to people. I'm one of the lead engineers here, and I am working on making payments basically for commerce. So I work in a commerce space, and that's it. That's all about me. I'm not interesting. So.
Okay, Jenna.
Hi, everyone. It's a great honor to be here because for one reason that James used to be my boss's boss's boss. And so to be able to sit on the same panel discussion, yeah, that's really great. And for the second reason that I'm located in Vancouver, BC. So normally, if without a virtual form, I won't be able to join. So it's nice to hear some tips and from people like you guys. So I have been with D2L for 6 years now as a senior test developer. And so I guess people probably know D2L. We do online learning software, the LMS. And before D2L, I worked at CA Technologies. And I guess the old name is the Computer Associates. And there I worked on a product called the API Gateway. It's very heavy backend product, handling everything that you can think of for a server. And then before that, I worked in a company doing 3D modeling and procedural simulation type of software, and that was purely for military usage. So for a while, I was really good at assemble, disassemble an AK-47 virtual model. So that was fun. And yeah, and then even before that, I was also working on some online educational software. And so yeah, that's about me.
Thank you. Geoff?
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Sherritt. I'm a test engineer at Google, and I've been with Google for just over 6 years. In particular, I work on the under the Nest team. So we make smart thermostats, smart speakers, smart displays. In particular, I work on the iOS version of the Home app, so the app you actually use to control all your devices. But other than Google, I've been working in the area, KW area, for just over 10 years now. So I know a lot of these people.
Excellent. Thanks, Geoff. Okay, so kind of when we were putting this panel together, one of the questions that I think many of our members would like to know, kind of the broad question that we presented: how do things work where you work? And that's what we wanted to talk about today. And we want to get a sense, because a lot of times as testers and developers, we work very much in isolation, and occasionally we get out to events like this, but we don't always get to see how things work where other people work. So I'll start with some high-level questions, and we'll drill down a bit. The first one I'd like to ask is if you could just briefly describe the development process at a high level. I am gonna kind of time box these at 2 minutes because first of all, we don't want you going too in-depth details, you probably have an NDA. Second of all, I think people will just want to see it from a high level. So James, I think yours will probably be interesting. We may be learning with you.
Sure, if you want me to go first. Like I'm going to sort of step away from what masterclass does because I'm still learning that. I think what's super important when it comes down to development cycle is you apply it to the problem you're trying to solve. If it's a bug fix or small feature, as I've led those teams in the past, the way you work is more of a Kanban style of priority listing with testing very, very involved in that. If it's something that you're trying to do from an experimentation point of view, you tend not to really think through testing and quality because you're just trying to get feedback from the system. I think every place that I've worked has sort of had the same philosophy, and I try to drive this in my teams as well. Testing is an integral part of the entire process, right? As a developer going through school, I wasn't taught how to test. Testing wasn't really even a course when I was in school. It's a mindset that's a little bit different. And so getting that testing voice, whether it's from the product side, the testing side, whoever is filling that role for you, in some cases it's the customer, getting that voice involved as early as possible so you're thinking through the risk profiles and the potential outcomes is how I've always sort of run my teams. And then I'm sorry, I can't give you more insight into masterclass. Give me a couple of weeks and I'll write something up for everybody.
Fair enough. Thank you. Shane.
Yeah, I could talk about, so at Cash App, we try to push decision making down as low as possible.
Okay.
And I think what that does for us is it allows our development cycle to be very tight. And it doesn't involve a large number of people. Most of the things I work on, I design, test, and implement. So that ownership on my part it allows me to make decisions on something. I don't have to wait for a PM to tell me what to do. At times there are business decisions, but when it comes to development decisions and development, it's a pretty closed loop. I have some junior engineers that I work with right now and some senior engineers, and it's a constant feedback cycle with them. And we rely heavily on paired programming to get things done, get second eyes on things. But in terms of cycle, it's quite lean. We branch off master, we merge into master, and we deploy very rapidly. So yeah, quite quick, quite agile, very small changes, very small cycles. So
thank you. Excellent. Jenna, could you tell us a little bit about your development process?
Yeah, it sounds very similar to what James and Shane already covered, but I just want to point out that we have Scrum teams, and each Scrum team is responsible for some features or tools they own, and most of the Scrum teams are they have multiple developers, dev manager, product manager, UX designer, and usually just one single test dev / QA person. And each Scrum team is very empowered to do decision making on the tool they own, and we also pretty much all follow the monthly train release. So the good thing is they are empowered. They move things fast, but the downside, or the most challenging thing we usually face is the Scrum teams could be working in silos. So we always want to kind of have, for example, for QA people, we have a tester of community of practice to try to do collaboration type of work and sharing best practices.
Excellent, thank you. And Geoff, can we hear a little bit about yours?
Sure. So Google's a big company, so I'm going to talk specifically about Nest. And from what I've seen, most teams choose either sort of a Kanban or a sprint model for their managing their work. And then on the release side, we use a train model, which has already been mentioned, different release cadences for our backend servers and our front-end apps. An interesting maybe difference than the other companies is Google uses a monolithic source control. So we generally never branch. So we have a lot of experiments, configurations, feature flags, compilation flags, which allows us to simulate the branching aspect. There's some downsides but some benefits to that as well. And then sort of the integration between testing and dev. It's not uncommon to have maybe one tester resource for 8 to 10 people. So we very much, I like Jenna's word, empower the developers to do their own testing through all the automated tools that they have at their disposal.
Excellent, thank you. So a couple of you, well, actually, let's open it up to questions first, and then I'll move on to my next question. Any participants have any questions for any of the speakers about kind of what their development process looks like? Any questions about how that process works at a high level again? If there are no hand raised or people shouting out or anything in the chat, I will move on. Okay, so who does the testing in the organization you work with? I know some of you have touched on this, but if you could just give us a bit more details about it, we'll cap this question at a minute per participant. We'll start with you, James.
Yeah, for sure. Ideally, it's the developer who's doing the first set of tests. Very similar to what Shane's saying, right? It's that tight loop and that tight cycle. It's probably part of the code review. But we all have to remember that not every company, especially in this area, is SaaS-based. Not every company is on continuous deployment. If I think back to my medical imaging days, those test cycles were super long because what we were doing could literally kill somebody if we got it wrong. And so you choose the tester based on the risk profile of the change, is basically how I boil it down to.
Excellent, that's a great summary.
Yeah, so who does testing on my team? Again, developers are the sole testers on my team. We don't have testers as like a title or as a role. Everything we do is tested by ourselves, and I think that comes back to the ownership piece where my merit and my success in the company is tied to the success of the things I own. And if those things fail, then that reflects poorly on me. And that motivates me to test things really well. We make small changes, so failures tend to be small. And we just blanket things with automated testing. And that's kind of, that responsibility is covered in code reviews. So the accountability is there to say, hey, you didn't add tests or something like that. So we're not medical, but we do, when we fail on our code, it could mean the difference between someone paying for their groceries or not. So as much as we're not killing people, like we feel that responsibility. So.
Thank you.
Very similar to what James and Shane were saying. We definitely in our working towards that everybody on the team sharing testing load. So I guess the setup of the Scrum team having only one test dev / QA person means that person is the owner. It is like a quality owner rather than the only person covering all the testing work. So we want that person to be on the high level and have like define the testing strategies and having approaches and probably giving examples and templates, but then to kind of have a guideline and all the define all the testing areas, but everybody sharing that load and I like the ownership, the accountability side of concept that everybody owns their own work, the quality of their own work, and this way we feel like it's the benefits of doing this is avoiding a single point of failure because there's only one QA person, so that you if that person is not available, being sick for a week, then you have the team is not struggling. And also from scaling point of view, you want to be able to scale your QA resources. So when testing work piled up, you can quickly scale from one person to multiple people, the whole team covering things, and not just from front-end UI testing point of view, but the full stack from front-end, back-end, DevOps, if you have them, so that everybody share the knowledge of testing.
Excellent, thank you. And Geoff?
Well, it's everybody's responsibility for the quality of the product, of course. But for the actual testing, Google has inside the engineering department, there is a team called Engineering Productivity, which is what I'm a part of. And that includes test engineers, software developers, and some contract manual testers. And the goal of engineering productivity organization is to empower the developers to do as much testing as they can. We like to use the phrase impact multiplier. So developers aren't dumb. They obviously know how to build the product. They can test the product, but they aren't necessarily the experts in these particular tools. So an example I usually give is performance testing. There's a lot of nuances with performance testing. So if you have an expert in that tool, you can get a lot done a lot faster if you have them helping you out. So what does that actually mean in practice? Developers are responsible for writing unit tests. They often will write sort of simpler contract or integration tests. Just because of reliability reasons, the Enterprise organization usually will own the end-to-end tests, especially on Nest, because we deal with real hardware. We're building physical devices alongside our apps and backend servers. So Enterprise will also maintain a lot of our physical hardware labs, which requires a little bit of care.
Now, is there anybody who had any follow-up questions for that?
Yeah, so I actually lead a team of automation testers at TrustWave here in Waterloo. My question is that to any of you who specifically have all the developers doing the work. So it is hard to maintain the test scripts. It is hard to maintain the test environments. You continuously need to update the test scripts to goes with the releases and different bugs and each feature improvements. It's a lot of work, right? It takes, like for me and my team, it takes almost a week to update something new. How can you make sure that developers take that task apart from unit testing, say feature testing or specific you know, if you're testing a feature branch or things like that, how you take care of that thing.
Anybody want to field that?
I'll say something. You're right. Automated tests, definitely, there's a cost, an ongoing cost. So we try to run our automated tests all the time. So we'll run automated tests in pre-submit, so before we submit the code to the main source control. If the code in the pull request breaks the test, it's the responsibility of that developer to fix it. Sometimes those changes aren't caught right away, or they're caused by another team, in which case we're always running our automation post-submit continuously. Because we're running them all the time, it's usually easy enough to do a culprit analysis to pin down who caused the problem. At least that's how we can triage it to, you know, get someone to fix it. But you're absolutely right. There's lots of dependency issues that can happen that is not your team's fault. Similarly, you can add more layers of abstraction, some kind of page object model for UI tests to try to centralize that maintenance. But the solution that we sort of found is, if you run your automated tests all the time, at least the cause of the breakages are easy to track down, either because the changes that have been submitted since the last run are small, or temporally small because you just ran them like an hour ago or 5 minutes ago.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we move on?
I'll make a comment. This has been asking. From what I'm hearing, maybe I've missed it, but I certainly see the value in the unit tests and automated tests that developers are contributing to, and I think that's really good stuff. My concern is a little bit like the end-to-end, the overall coverage, as well as the dev versus tester mindset. Now, there are exceptions, don't get me wrong, but generally speaking, devs tend to be fairly focused, I would say, generally speaking, and testers generally are more broader. So I guess there were just some red flags in some of the comments that have been made. And so how do you, what's my question? How do you ensure that the quality is going to be good at the end of the day? Like, anyway, I just have a bit of concern about that. I don't know if you can take anything from that.
Thanks, Ben. Anybody want to field that?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. This might be a hot take. I think end-to-end tests are a fool's errand. I really do. And as I see some laughing. As your system grows and as your features grow, it becomes unrealistic to maintain it. You're end-to-end testing so many things, and then you throw in the fact that you might have microservices. So now you have to have a prod-like environment that is truly fleshed out, and that's prod. You have a prod, you have a production environment, and if you at any point fake something or mock it or stub it, now your end-to-end tests have no fidelity, or less fidelity. So I think efforts are better placed in unit tests and contract tests. If I know that my service is always sending the appropriate data, and your service tests that it handles the data appropriately, then we can have a little more faith in that end-to-end, as opposed to trying to put effort into maintaining a second site like it's a production site. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have a staging site or a sandbox or something, but inevitably things will get mocked in there. A great example for us is that we talk to the Visa network, we talk to the MasterCard network. We have to mock that. We aren't going to test with real money. So at that point, an end-to-end test is impossible in a true sense. So.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I was going to say, yeah, this is a great question, I think, and it has maybe two different aspects. One is, as Shane pointed out, there's layers of testing, from unit integration, probably API and UI component level if you have a shared web UI components, and the UI end-to-end. So the lower the level you implement testing, the cheaper. And as you go to end-to-end, that's more expensive, harder to maintain, more time consuming, harder to diagnose if there's a failed test. But there's also a different aspect from cultural point of view, that if your devs are willing to cover beyond unit and integration, and probably traditionally thinking the API, the UI component, UI end-to-end, those are kind of QA's responsibility. But I guess from my team's own experience, we had that cultural, I guess, dev hesitation from touching the more higher level testing responsibilities, but we kind of made them and try it. And so originally there's yeah, they have to do it, but as they go, the devs, they kind of jump out of the very pieces of functionalities, stories they work on. They become looking at things at the feature level and like a more bigger picture, and which so now they start caring about other stories in the iteration and other parts of the feature, and then which also allows your QA person to be even higher level, looking at your feature integration with other features, and more at the product level. So everybody kind of kept an eye on the bigger picture. And now if you ask the devs on my team, and they would not want to go back to only look at their stories, because they have to see the benefits.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on?
I'm just going to make a quick comment. I generally agree with everything that was said by the panel, but in defense of end-to-end tests, when you buy a Google Home, on the side of the box, it will say like, these are the things you can do with your device, and it'll say like, okay, G, what's the weather? There are critical user journeys are printed on the side of the box. Like if that doesn't work, people are going to be confused. They're going to be angry. It has to work. And I don't need to get into the architectural plan, but there's a lot going on to make that happen. And it really does need an end-to-end test to 100% prove that that use case is satisfied. Similarly, because once again, I'm dealing with hardware, when you buy a smart device, you have to set it up. One of the first steps to set it up is telling it what Wi-Fi to connect to. That step has to work. If these internet-enabled devices can't connect to the internet, they're essentially a brick, especially because one of the very first things they do is download updates. So that has to work. So that's a smaller end-to-end test in the sense that it's just the interaction between our setup app and the physical device. But that is something we absolutely test all the time in an end-to-end way.
I totally agree. We can't skip end-to-end.
Thanks, Geoff. James, we'll just give you an opportunity if you want to dive in on that, or I was thinking maybe, kind of from your experience with medical, maybe you have a perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, medical is a whole new space. Jeffrey's not wrong, and there is a lot of end-to-end, but I think one of the themes that I'm hearing there from Ben's question and Deepak's question, there is a bit of tech debt accumulation in those questions and a whole bunch of architectural weirdness in those questions, right? You design for testability, and Shane put it best. If I know I'm producing the right information and your service or your class or your whatever is designed to consume that information correctly, that's an architectural choice. So I've been around the block many times. I work for many companies, and it's a very common issue where you design for performance, you design for scalability, but everybody seems to forget the design for testability. And that's the piece that you really have to build in here. Whether you have manual testers, whether you have an automated test framework, whether you have end-to-end tests for down to the unit level, if you're not designing for it to be testable and repeatable and confirmable, it doesn't much matter what your end-to-end test use case is. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You're going to fail, and you're going to fail hard.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks. And thanks, Ben. I think that was a really good, good inspiration. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Let's talk about the mix of exploratory and automated testing. So what would you say, kind of high level, is your mix of exploratory versus automated testing? We'll start with you, James.
Yeah, I think that for me is always dependent on the phase of the maturity of the product, right? As I'm starting down a path, I don't know, pick a mobile video game, as we're starting to develop on an iOS platform, there is a lot of just manual exploratory testing to understand how things are interacting, how things are working. As you sort of hone in, and Jeffrey put it best, there will be these use cases that have to work, right? I have to be able to log in, I have to be able to make a play, I have to be able to make an in-app purchase. That's where you really start to hone in on that automated testing. And so to me, it has always depended on the phase of the project and the maturity of the project. So in the end, I always leave about 20% at least for just exploratory testing, off the beaten path, side path testing, and try to automate as much as I possibly can.
Excellent.
We're very heavily automated. We're very, very heavily automated. So microservices, architecture, blah, 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 microservices. We keep our tests for the service within the service. So every single service tests itself. And then how we exploratory test is we dog food our products. So if you are in San Francisco at Square and you go for lunch in the cafeteria, you pay for your lunch with on a Square terminal. So you swipe your card and everything, and that's a great way to explore that use case. We incentivize people in Cash App to use the product by making it valuable to use, and then that's how we exploratory test. So every single person, from our customer support to our designers, product, they're all going to have different personas, and they're all going to use that product in a different way. So when you motivate your developers and your employees to use your product, and I know that's not possible for everybody. I mean, how many nests can you have in your house before you might have too many? But for us, we're able to get every single employee using our product in different ways, whether it be purchasing Bitcoin or whatever. I sound like I'm plugging Cash App now, so I'm going to stop. But yeah, that's how we exploratory test, motivating our employees to use the product.
Excellent. Jenna?
Yeah, what James and Shane said. And I just want to add that because earlier we talked about different layers of testing at the lower level, like the unit integration level. We made them mandatory, meaning like at least 80% of the code need to be covered by unit integration tests in order to merge a PR and to pass the build. And then, but at the API level and above, that's kind of depending on the feature, the nature of that feature, and that's where the QA person, the test dev, comes into play, like to design, like how much is it's appropriate to those different layers. And I would say our API testing, like a lot of them, maybe even match the 80% coverage on the API, but the UI component, that's like at least is more stable than the UI end-to-end. So as higher you go, the lower percentage of automation we make. But just to cover the bare minimum and the very basic, they have to work kind of scenario, we at least aiming for 10% of the UI end-to-end scenarios to be automated.
Excellent. Thank you. Geoff, what's your mix of exploratory to automated?
Yeah, so to the best of my knowledge, there is no official internal tool for exploratory testing. So nobody is, as far as I know, nobody's writing their sessions down or anything like that. So that's a hint. We definitely rely on automation. We use automation as much as possible. Partly because of the benefits of automation itself, but also the environment that we operate in. Google's a very big company. Some of our products have billions of users. So we need to be running automated tests all the time. Because that infrastructure exists for those products, that infrastructure is available for other products, including Nest. So we can leverage a lot of really big tools to do really big things. We have automated tests for unit test integration end-to-end tests, but we can also do some automated tests to make sure that when you say, okay, Google, the waveform is properly analyzed and parsed and sent. So we have audio testing. We also do video testing. Our cameras have live stream video into the app. So we need to be able to know what's the quality, what's the frame rate, is it buffering, what's the delay? So we have lots and lots and lots of automated tests. That said, it's not like we never test the product ourselves. It's very common to have a developer have a product sitting on their desk as they're developing and working on it. Similarly, for a test engineer or someone in EngProd to have multiple devices on their desk, usually for the setup process. But we also use fish fooding and dog fooding for our own internal employees. It's pretty common, especially for our smart speaker and smart display products, for we to give them to people on the team or people within Nest, just to use them every day. Shane's had the absolute right idea, which is basically the more you can use the product, just the more testing in real world scenarios, the more you can find real bugs that actually happen because they happened. So we leverage dog fooding a lot. And I would say for the most part, that's probably our exploratory testing substitute.
Excellent. Can I use the term fish fooding? I don't think I've heard that one before.
So if dog fooding is sort of internal team testing, fish fooding is like that, but it's even smaller.
Okay.
Because fish food's smaller than dog food.
Okay.
Partly just because there could be the team that's working on the product, which is like 10 people, and then the team which owns the product, which could be up to 100 people.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I like it. I thought maybe it was like products you had to swim with or something. Okay. Any questions on that, the topic of automation versus exploratory? Give a few seconds for folks to put their hand up or shout out in the chat.
I'd like to add one thing about exploratory testing, because that's where the human touch comes in, and we don't want things just work. We want them to work well and to give user a nice experience. And we actually put a lot of emphasis on user friendliness. And so that's why we can't afford just not having exploratory testing.
Excellent. Thank you for adding that. Okay. Let's jump on to our next question. And this one, just gonna dig a little bit deeper and kind of focus a little bit on defects and kind of what happens when a defect is discovered. So a common measure used today, mean time to recovery. So my question is, how long does it take you from the time that an issue is found and to the time when it's kind of fixed in production? So this is kind of assuming that we have a production issue that's discovered and get it recovered. So James, I don't know if you want to add to this one or if you want to pass. I'll let you pass if you'd like, but
I'll pass on this one and maybe come back at the end, right? I think
Okay.
it's super important just to highlight that MTTR, or how quickly you get a defect fixed, isn't just a quality thing. It's also a deployment thing and a customer
Absolutely,
support
yeah.
thing and in everything. So I'll just add that, but I'll let the other three answer because I couldn't tell you how quickly this happens at Masterclass yet.
Excellent. Shane.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I guess it depends on the severity of something. I mean, if somebody can't log in, or if, a million people can't log in, those are going to have very different times behind them. Generally, we deploy when stuff is ready to production. So our on-call is follow the sun. So we have a team in Melbourne, Australia that takes what would be our night and we take their night. And as part of our on-call cycle, we deploy 2 times a day, 2 to 1 times a day. So all in general, we could deploy up to 4 times a day. So as soon as something is discovered, it's fixed in code, it's probably within 12 hours deployed. So once again, it depends on the severity. If something gets picked up and it's a critical bug and it hits the top of the priority list and it's fixed that day, it should be deployed within 12 hours to production.
Excellent. Thank you. Jenna?
Yeah, I totally agree. It depends on the severity and impact of the defect. I feel like technically we can fix and deploy as we needed.
Okay.
But I think this is more than just technical. It's also how if you say have to ship a hotfix to your customers, it also have to be aligned with the release notes, documentation, the release engineering, how they communicate with other customers who didn't run into the issue yet. It's a chain of effects. So and also like your feature flags, and can you use your feature flags to kind of minimize the impact? So yeah, I think that all have to be considered as part of this process.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Geoff.
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the severity of the fix, but the severity of the problem, but also the type of fix required. So if it was an experiment or configuration that just needed to be changed, probably turned off, then in theory we could do that immediately. We just push a config file to our backends and it's gone. If it's sort of a code change, that's when sort of the negotiation comes in. We do use a release train model. I Ideally, if the fix isn't severe enough, it would just get prioritized onto the next train and then follow the normal release process. That said, our build infrastructure is capable of releasing essentially on demand. You could spin up a hotfix or an incremental release that just cherry picks in the change and pushes it out pretty quickly. For servers, it's very quickly. For apps, it's a little bit slower just because there's the App Store approval and some other paperwork that sort of gets in the way. Similarly, it's also about risk. So talking about physical devices, once again, when we push an update to a smart speaker, that update can't brick the device because it's hard to recover. It's not impossible to recover, but it's hard to recover. So even if it's a small change, even if it's this will definitely not break anything type change, we still need to put it through its paces because if you have a bad over-the-air update, you could be turning people's smart devices into bricks. So there's just a little bit of due diligence there. Similarly, especially for our smart devices, we have a staged global rollout. So even if you had the fix in hand and was ready to go, it just does take a little bit of time. Mostly that's just for safety. And by safety, I just mean that we aren't causing any issues. But in theory, you could move very quickly there. Once again, the best case scenario is it really isn't that isn't a high priority issue, and you can just wait for the next release train.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we're at 12:52 right now. I had two questions left. I'm really struggling which one to answer. And I don't know if any of the presenters had anyone. I think I'm going to go with the one that I'd asked you about was, what's the one testing activity that you perform that you think would be beneficial to most organizations?
Oh, I'll jump in. That's an interesting one. So, I mean, it's more to add on to what Jeffrey just said, right? It's not even a testing activity. It's a risk assessment and a rollback strategy as you think through what you're deploying. So the ability to turn things off immediately or stage the rollout. So if you impact part of your population versus all of your population, it's really that risk mitigation step that I would never replace in the development cycle of how impactful is this? Assume things are going to go wrong. We're developing software. You're never perfect. And what is your backup plan, your revert plan, or your fix plan? And that's a step that I will never, ever skip in a major feature release.
Okay. Shane.
Yeah, I can jump in on this. I think that I'm going to try to word this delicately. I think having a testing team that is not integrated with the development team and a part of the entire process, it starts to feel like throwing things over the fence. And then some voice behind the wall tells you this is broken. You're like, okay. I think that's detrimental. It causes divide, causes animosity. So that's something that people should stop doing. Teams should stop doing. So I guess that's a different answer to the question. The other thing I think is counterintuitive is longer release cycles don't protect you any more than a short release cycle. And it's actually, in my opinion, the opposite. And every change you make to a product adds a level of entropy to that release. And the more changes you add to your release, the higher that entropy is. And in my experience, releases don't tend to fail because a feature was broken. Releases tend to fail because a few features did not work well together, or multiple changes didn't work well together. So the more changes you add, the more likely you are to hit collision. So when companies and leadership start to add on process and long release cycles and more checks and balances, it just adds more entropy. And I think it's actually detrimental to a release cycle. So shorter, concise release cycles are something we should do more.
Excellent. Thank you. Jenna, what's one thing that you think would be beneficial to most organizations?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear that when we ask about one thing about testing, the most beneficial, people are talking about not technical. It's more like risk management and etc. And release cycle, etc. So I totally agree that the the standalone QA team is not, it won't work very well. But even with the QA person integrated with the dev team, it still have to kind of make the QA's responsibility more from quality, I guess, assessment point of view, that you kind of come up with the strategy and approach and to minimize those risks, and not just thinking about functional, but all the non-functional perspectives, like performance, accessibility that people mentioned from the chat, and security, and that's a big one too. And all the deployability, and all the because we tend to think, okay, the functionality works is good enough, but all these other things, and one more thing I want to point out is we know there will be defects going out, but how to make sure those defects are not severe, not major, and how to quickly even monitor your production environment, and so that if something happened making a big impact to your users, at least you get alerted right away, like quickly enough, so that you can react to that. So all these things that a quality person has to have a strategy for, and so they can not just get them so busy with testing stories. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Geoff, is there anything that you would say?
Yeah, I'm going to give a slightly different answer. So my day job lately has been thinking about process and metrics, and how to release, and how to measure the quality of the app and stuff like that. And I'm finding that there's a wealth of knowledge, there's a wealth of data, there's a wealth of metrics that the QA type organization has access to. Right, like we interact with the dev team, so we know what's going on over there. We interact with the release team because often we're the last step before release. We interact with users. We look at bug reports. We're often sometimes the most knowledgeable people for certain parts of the product. Why? Because we either touch it directly, or we know the people who do. So we have all this knowledge, we have all this data, we have potentially performance metrics, code coverage, time to release, the static code analysis, and for the most part, it stays with us. And I see my dev teams are like hungry for this data. They have questions that they want answered, but they don't know where to start, just because they're not necessarily familiar with all the other types of tools. They're not familiar with all the different ways that they can sort of access the logs that we have. And it's sort of been my mission over the last year or more, just trying to sort of gather, surface, analyze, provide insights, and give them to the people that are looking for this information. And I think that's one thing that we can do as a team, is just communicate more, and give all this great information and knowledge that we have access to, and just make it readily available.
And beautifully timed, Geoff. We're right at 1 o'clock. So unfortunately, not a lot of extra time for additional questions, but I see the chat has been quite busy, and definitely appreciate that. I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists. I appreciate your being here and candidly asking our intrusive questions about your organizations. Hopefully our attendees were able to enjoy this format, and just on behalf of the KWSQA, thank you everyone, and we will see you in July. I don't know if you have any closing comments, Bailey, or we'll just wrap it up. Okay,
Nope. Just remember that there's a survey that you'll get in your inboxes this afternoon. So we'd love to hear your feedback on how it went so that we can just improve on panel discussions in the future. And thanks again to all of our panelists for coming out today.
Thanks for organizing.